Good evening, everyone. And welcome to the United Conservative Party debate, the second of 5 debates broadcasting live tonight from Edmonton. We can have a little round of applause at this point. Man. My name is Dave Rutherford. I'm your moderator for this debate. I have the easy job. I ask the questions. These guys have to answer them. And as you may know from question period in Parliament and in the legislature, it isn't always answer period, but we'll find out anyway when I ask the questions. We have the 4 candidates here tonight, as you know. We've taken a draw in the order in which the contestants appear, and the order in which they will answer questions has all been predetermined by the draw. And you'll see the podiums set up in this manner. I'll introduce the contestants to you in a moment, but that has all been predetermined by a random draw before we got here tonight. There'll be 3 themes for our debate tonight. There'll be different themes in different debates. The 3 themes for tonight are healthcare, education, and labor relations. Yes, there is a murmur. I agree with you. It's going to be a fun night. We'll also have a question tonight from the membership of the party. We've had lots of input from members, and our leadership election committee here tonight has chosen one of those to be asked near the end of the debate. We'll also have one question tonight from social media. And even someone here in the audience or someone watching elsewhere tonight can participate in that by going to Twitter. And here's the Twitter address, hashtag UCPLDR. Hashtag UCPLDR. Submit a question, and our leadership election committee will survey them, and we'll ask one of those questions as our final question tonight as well. And the way the format works, every contestant will be given 2 minutes to answer a question. There'll be a 1-minute rebuttal period as well, and they will indicate to me if they wish to rebut, which is pretty much a given, but they will indicate to me anyway, and we'll do that in an order, orderly, we hope, but also in an order from which they indicate they want to rebut a question. So, without further ado, let's introduce our 4 contestants, ladies and gentlemen. Jason Kenney, Doug Schweitzer, Brian Jean, and Jeff Callaway. All right, thank you all very much. In just a moment, the people here in our Northlands auditorium are going to see the back of my head and also the back of the head of my cohort here. His name is Rich Newman. He's a member of the Leadership Election Committee for the party. And Rich will be helping me operate the timing and trying to keep these gentlemen a little bit under control. There will be a 2-minute opening address by each of the contestants, and then we'll begin with our questions. And as I said earlier, the order of the question answering and of the rebuttals has been somewhat predetermined. Now, gentlemen, you understand, and I'm going to switch microphones. Gentlemen, the same rules as the first debate. If you wish to rebut, raise a hand, give me some indication that you're prepared to enter a rebuttal, and we'll recognize you in the order in which I see you indicate you want to rebut. It's the only real housekeeping order we have. All right, let's begin our debate tonight with opening statements. The first from Jason Kenney. Jason.
Friends, look at this room. Look at the energy here. They said it wasn't possible. The cynics said we couldn't create a united conservative movement when we started this Unite Alberta effort a year ago. But here we are, I think about 100,000 members strong and ready to be the next government of Alberta. You know, Albertans are counting on us. 200,000 unemployed Albertans, tens of thousands of small business people who have lost their dreams, tens of thousands of Albertans who have left this province as the NDP has turned the greatest brain gain into a huge brain drain. Friends, Alberta is more than just a place. This is an idea. It's an idea of a place where hard work can turn into success, where we believe in the creative power of a free economy, where we believe that the family and self-reliant individuals are infinitely more effective and more important than an all-powerful bureaucratic state. And that Alberta is under attack right now from this debt quadrupling, job killing, tax raising, accidental socialist government, which is why we must work together to defeat it. And let me say, Edmonton must be part of getting Alberta back on track. Edmonton has always depended on a vibrant private sector economy, and public sector workers in this town understand that you cannot redistribute wealth unless somebody's creating it in the first place. And so I guarantee to you that if I am leader, Edmonton will be at the heart of the United Conservative Party. We will move our headquarters here, our resources will be focused here, and we will do everything we can to win every seat in the greater Edmonton area to ensure that Edmontonians have a place at the table where the decisions are made under the next government of Alberta. Let's get it done.
And a 2-minute opening statement from Doug Schweitzer. Mr. Schweitzer, go ahead.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for being here today. I also want to thank my fellow candidates for participating in these debates. We're probably going to end up spending about 10 hours together over the next few weeks. So I also want to thank my wife, who's at home today with our 2 little girls. They have school tomorrow. But I really want to thank you for being here and being a part of this. I get asked a lot, why are you doing this? Why are you in this race? You're a partner at the largest law firm in the world. You work on multi-billion-dollar transactions and restructurings. Why? Why are you in this race? And the answer is simple. Because this is Alberta. We're second to no one. And at this juncture in Alberta, we need someone with private sector experience that knows to get a dollar and stretch the value of that dollar, who has experience turning around organizations that are broken. That's what I do for a living. I take companies that are broken and help turn them around. And that's exactly what we need to do with our government. Also, I want to make sure that my daughters view this province the exact same way that I did when I started my career. A confident Alberta, an Alberta that set the agenda across Canada, an Alberta that knew its place and set the agenda in this nation. For the last couple of years in my profession, I've seen too many companies go under, too many companies where people lose their jobs. It hits me on a personal level. My family went through that in the early 1980s. My parents lost their business, lost their home, struggled, but they were resilient. And Albertans are resilient, and they're ready to lead again. They're ready to set a strong agenda again. That's why our campaign has set forward the largest tax relief in Alberta history on day one. I also offer this party a fresh start, to turn the page on the past. I'm a social moderate. We need to take these divisive social issues that the NDP want to campaign on off the table. That way we'll hold the NDP accountable on the economy. That's the winning formula for Edmonton to win seats here. That's the winning formula to win seats across Alberta. I'm looking forward to this debate.
And a 2-minute opening statement from Brian Jean. Mr. Jean.
For me, leadership is about service. It's about never forgetting why we're here. Our United Conservative Party exists because Albertans need us, and they need us right now. It needs our ideas, needs our unity, and it needs our true sense of purpose. That's why I'm here, and that's why all of you here are here tonight. We want to restore Alberta to a place of greatness, where opportunity is bountiful, jobs are plentiful, and hope replaces fear. I believe that must be our vision for Alberta. I'm a husband, a father, a grandfather. I'm a businessman, a lawyer, and a normal Albertan. My wife, Kim, will tell you that I'm not the most polished of politicians, but I have spent my entire life serving others. I've built and run businesses that employ families. I've spoken up for Alberta on a continuous basis in Ottawa for a decade as a member of Parliament. And I had the great privilege of leading the Wild Rose through a general election, and for the last 2 years have served you all as the leader of the official opposition here in Alberta. But most importantly, I'm an Albertan, and I love this province. I'm here for Albertans, and I'm here to lead this party to defeat the NDP in the next general election and to form a government that restores prosperity to all Albertans. Friends, This leadership race is about who can guarantee the defeat of the NDP in the next election. And all the polls show that I'm the only candidate who can win seats in the capital region right here and all across Alberta. We brought these two parties together to provide Albertans with a common sense party that they can get behind in overwhelming numbers. We united two parties to defeat the NDP, and with your help, our party, our ideas, will take back our province and restore Alberta to prosperity. Thank you. Thank you.
And now a two-minute opening statement from Jeff Callaway. Mr. Callaway.
Thank you. Thanks to Dave Rutherford for doing this again tonight. A little round of applause, everyone, for Dave.
Thank you.
All right, folks, you know, some of you know me and some of you don't. So I thought I'd just do a little bit of background on where I come from. You know, I'm a fifth-generation Albertan, grew up on a dairy farm. I often tell people that it doesn't matter if your leg's broke, you got to milk the cows twice a day. That's the kind of work ethic that I learned, and so many Albertans learned in growing up in this province. But I went to university at the University of Calgary, graduated with a degree in international relations. Still waiting for the ambassadorship from the Prime Minister. Not going to hold my breath on that one. But I ended up working in finance. I've been there for 18 years now. But Doug talks about his background too. It's a little bit of the same of mine. It's about entrepreneurs in Alberta, but it's working with clients and understanding what their hopes and dreams and fears are. What they feel is risking their future. What they feel is taking away their potential prosperity in this province. But that's why I got involved in politics with the Wild Rose back in the day. It was like building a business, and that's exactly what we did. I ended up rewriting our entire policy base and doing the news releases and building us up from 1,000 names on a spreadsheet. I was the president when we stood up against the floor crossing, which really took away the rights and the respect of the voters and the members. But with Heather Forsyth, we built that party back up, and we formed the official opposition. That Brian was actually the leader of it at the time. But now I'm called towards putting my big ideas forward. I believe in them because I feel our economy is at risk. And if we've got economic prosperity, a lot of things can flow from there. But we'll have a chance to debate about that over the course of the evening. Looking forward to it. And let's have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, contestants. Let's get then to our first question on education. One of the central parts of the Alberta Advantage, back to the time of Peter Lougheed, has been the province's support for parental choice in education. We have a rich community of public, separate, and independent schools, but recently some of the NDP's allies have been urging the Notley government to close separate school boards and end the province's support for independent schools. We've also seen the NDP shut down one of the homeschooling organizations in the province. How important is choice in education for you, and what role should parents play in governing their children's education? First answer, 2 minutes, Mr. Kenney.
Dave, nothing is more important. One of the greatest things about Alberta is our tradition of school choice, one of the greatest legacies of past Conservative governments, which says that, go ahead, yes. It says that it recognizes that every child is unique and every family's values are a bit different. It recognizes that competition creates better results. It recognizes that, you know, we hear from Rachel Notley and Justin Trudeau a lot about diversity. She doesn't seem to believe in diversity where it matters most, which is in the school system. And, you know, this is not just a political preference. It is a universal human right. The Article 26.3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that parents have a prior right to choose the form of education that their children will receive. And our School Act says that parents are the primary educators of children and that schools operate in loco parentis, under the delegated authority of parents. And so I think it's deeply concerning that we see these growing attacks by the NDP on our tradition of school choice. We must stand up and defend and expand school choice, the alternative schools in the public and Catholic systems, the charter schools. We need to let them more charter schools come on stream, to support the independent schools and their real independence, not just a cosmetic independence. And yes, homeschoolers too, who make tremendous sacrifices to do what they believe is best for their kids. At the end of the day, we don't need politicians standing between parents and their children, but rather empowering parents. Empowering parents. Because we know that parents want only what's in the best interests of their children, and I don't think we should allow the NDP to drive political wedges between parents and their kids in our education system.
And the same question to Mr. Schweitzer. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dave. I've got two little girls. They're in the public education system. There's been too much politics in education for the last few years here in Alberta. It's just simply too much politics, and we need to get it out of the education parameters. When it comes to choice in education, I firmly believe that is one of the reasons why we had one of the best education systems in Alberta for so long. Because we had choice from public to charter, from Catholic to private. Really, that was a fundamental piece of it. We had competition in the system. That was fundamental. Another thing, too, that comes into this as well is that I want to comment on this because it is really a piece of it. A friend of mine, amazing family, just this last week, their little 13-year-old daughter attempted suicide. And it hit me on a personal level today when I talked to my friend about it. And when I talked to him about that and what's happening in our school systems right now, it comes up continually around gay-straight alliances in our province and that whole piece of it. When you take a look at the stats, suicide is the second highest killer of young people, young Albertans. When you talk to LGBTQ youth, 5 times higher likelihood to attempt suicide. When you take a look at homelessness, right now LGBTQ youth would be 5 to 10% of the population, but they make up 25 to 40% of homelessness. So when I take a look at that, and I take a look at the guiding principles behind the Gay-Straight Alliance and what it means fundamentally for our kids. I've got 2 little girls. If for some reason they weren't comfortable coming to talk to me, if for some reason they weren't comfortable looking to me for advice as to where they were, I sure would hope that they'd have a safe place to go where they get the support that they need. If we can save one kid's life or keep one kid off the street, it's the right policy. The facts, the evidence is there. We simply have to support that, turn the page on this policy, and take a clear stand that we won't out gay kids. Thank you.
And also 2 minutes for Brian Jean. Mr. Jean.
Thanks, Dave. Well, like Doug, I have children, and I raised my children here in Alberta. They went through the school system here, both the separate school board and the public school board. And I can't think of anything more important than to make sure that parents are always in charge of their children and their children's future. See, my wife was an elementary school teacher, and I know how important teachers are. In fact, if you think about it, who spends more time with your children than you? No one. But second comes teachers. And I can't think of anybody more important in my children's life except for the family that we were with than teachers. And we need to make sure we empower teachers to do what they need to do for us, the parents. We need to return our education system to the very best education system in the world. That was 15 years ago, and we can do it again. You see now, right now, today, we've slipped to the middle of the pack here in Canada. 15 years ago, we used to be number 1 in the world. And that's because I believe, in part, that we've seen some form of threatening by this government on our choice in education. And ultimately, if parents aren't in charge of their children's education, we won't have competition in education. And if we have competition in education, what it will mean is that parents will pick the best result for their child or children, depending. I even met one particular family that had one child go to one school system and another child go to the other school system because they felt that both children had individual independent needs and should have that opportunity to fulfill the best opportunity and the best drive for them. Because you see, I believe that if we get education right, everything else becomes so much easier in the future. And for what we have to tackle with the NDP and this debt, we absolutely have to get the most educated, competitive workforce in the world, and that's through our education system. Thank you.
And the same question, please, to Jeff Callaway. Mr. Callaway?
Sure. Well, I think we're going to broadly agree on this, that of the importance on parental choice and parental rights. The only thing I would add to it, and I'm sure you guys would agree as well, is we do need to protect our children from cases of abuse, though, and that's in the current system now. That being said, I'll take a little bit of a different tact on this question, other than agreeing with my colleagues here. I think we also need to provide more opportunities for access on educational programming, especially for our rural communities, and particularly STEM, science and technology, engineering and math. We need to go where the puck will be in this upcoming economy as it evolves with a greater emphasis on technology. We've got to upgrade our skills, and especially in those rural areas, the smaller schools, they don't have that same kind of opportunity. But we've got the technology in our system now that we can deliver those kinds of opportunities, especially as we look at university. 80% of the prerequisites that you need to get into university these days require math. But you talk to the professors and they say that, as Brian was saying, the skills are not there. We need to improve our training. We need to improve our curriculum. Thank you.
And gentlemen, as you know, we're in a rebuttal phase as well. If you wish to respond to some of the other contestants' comments, please indicate that you want to. Mr. Kenney did. Mr. Kenney, go ahead.
Dave, one of the things that really disturbs me is the NDP's growing politicization of our education system. Ironically, the Premier stood up using grade 6 kids as a prop at a public school to launch a vicious partisan attack against me while claiming that she wasn't politicizing the education system. You can't make this stuff up. They are rewriting our school curriculum. They're doing it in secret. They won't tell us who the so-called experts are. But if you look at their draft social studies curriculum, no reference to Canadian or Alberta history, parliamentary democracy, the rule of law, economic literacy, not one word about our military history, not one word about 118,000 Canadian war dead, but dozens of references to turning students into agents of change in Canada's history of oppression. It's simply wrong. And one other point, we need to recreate the vocational high schools, because I believe that a trade certificate, an apprenticeship or trade, has every bit as much value, merit, and worth as a university degree.
And Mr. Jean, go ahead. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Dave. I just want to be very clear. I truly think that all politicians from all parties need to stop using our children as props, to stop using our education system as props, because playing politics with our children will certainly lead to a much more negative result in our future. And I think that we all need to do that. And we should set that aside and focus on what's the most important thing in our children's life. That is truly education, the future, and their relationship with their parents. We must not ever interfere in that.
And Mr. Schweitzer, you have 1 minute.
I agree fully with Mr. Jean on that point. When it comes to this, we have to take the politics out of this. The temperature is rising too high. And when it comes to education, when it comes to educating our children, we simply have to put our children first. I mean, just going and seeing my kids, and when they go to school, their eyes light up. They want to be there. They want to learn. And we have to remember that as parents, that our school system is there to educate them. And our kids want our involvement in their lives. And they want to make sure that they have beautiful lives. They have amazing experiences at school. Kids' eyes light up when they go there. We can't forget that. One other piece, too, when it comes to the curriculum and understanding, is that we can't forget about the physical education of our kids as well. Too many times, schools are being built right now in Alberta without playgrounds. Playgrounds! It's unacceptable in this day and age. Our kids' physical education and having that healthy lifestyle is so integral to their development and growth. We simply have to turn the page on this. Our campaign, DougForAlberta.com, has a plan on that. Go there if you want the details.
And a chance for a 1 minute rebuttal, Mr. Callaway.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm blessed with is my wife. She's a school psychologist in Calgary in the Catholic Separate School Board. And one of the things that the Catholic Separate School Board deals with is a lot of immigrants from all around the world. And they can be refugees from war-torn countries in Africa. They can be kids with challenges or dealing with even gangs or just learning disabilities of whatever the whatever the disability may be. And one of the challenges that their school boards have is the funding for mental health care. And as Doug was mentioning, we're seeing a higher incidence of suicide rates. And so when we're looking at our expenditures and trying to get our budgeting under control, we can't just focus on blanket cuts to get our deficits under control. It needs to be more attuned, and some things are going to need some more resources. And frankly, mental health funding in our school system is going to need some more resources. See, my time's up here, so
it is.
Thanks.
Thank you. In obvious anticipation of possibly question 2, here is number 2 on education. Conservatives have been hearing about anti-oil lessons in Alberta's public schools, and we now know that at least one curriculum compares conservatives to fascists. Our public schools seem to be increasingly in the hands of people who reject all but their own ideological views. How can you fix the politicization of classrooms in the province? Mr. Schweitzer, you have 2 minutes.
I think the big point of that is even the premise of the question, Dave. The premise of that question, my mom is a retired school teacher. Governments changed, governments came and went. Her primary goal when she went to school to become a teacher was to teach kids. That was her primary goal in life. She loved children, she wanted to teach and educate them. It wasn't when the government changed, she didn't all of a sudden go, yes, now's my opportunity to create little socialists. That was not her goal in life. She wanted to make sure she gave those kids the ability to grow and develop. That was her fundamental premise of it. But really, when we take a look at what's happening in our education system, we really need to make sure that we're training our kids for the future. Our economies are changing rapidly. Our kids need the STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math, to be able to adapt to an ever-changing world. The one thing that I know, the reason why this is so important, I mean, beyond just having daughters in this, at some point in my life, I want to be able to retire. I want to be able to make sure that I can rely on a strong, publicly funded healthcare system. And those kids in our school system, those are future little taxpayers. They're people that are going to be having jobs and working, and we need to make sure that they have the education that they need. So that's just so fundamental to where we are.
Thank you. And we'll be alternating left and right in the order now based on some algorithm. Mr. Kenney, you have 2 minutes.
Dave, in the 14 months, I've put over 95,000 clicks on my pickup, traveling to every corner of the province. I've met hundreds of parents who have asked me things like this: why did my 12-year-old come home and accuse me of killing the planet, come home from school and accuse me of killing the planet because I work in the oil patch? And that's a darn good question. We need, and when I was going to elementary school, this sort of thing was unthinkable. My dad was a teacher and a principal, never would have tolerated this in the classroom. The toughest job, the most important job in our government will be the Minister of Education, one of whose tasks must be to get the politics out of the classroom. And let me tell you, if the NDP decides to proceed with what I expect to be their radical rewrite of our school curriculum, if it does add more and not less political and ideological content into the curriculum, I will scrap it and go back to the drawing board. Because Dave, the school system should be about transmitting essential knowledge and skills to help young people to succeed in the future. The basic skills including about civic literacy to be good citizens. They should be given critical thinking skills so they can come to their own conclusions about moral, political, and ethical questions rather than being told what to think. And we must remove failed pedagogical fads like Discovery Math. This was a huge mistake of a past PC government. When my colleagues are right to talk about STEM skills, but right now Alberta's math results are falling down like a waterfall, while in China and Korea they're taking off. Imagine what that means 20 years from now in a digital economy. We need to restore tried, true, and tested teaching methods, essential knowledge and skills, and parental authority in the education system.
And the same question to Mr. Callaway. Mr. Callaway, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks. You know, in some of my discussions with experts in the educational field, they tell me about this process of curriculum development. And, you know, one of them mentioned that on a panel of something like 60 advisors, there were only 2 that were actually math professors on the math curriculum. There were only 2 that were actually math professors in university. The rest were various consultants and advisors and the whole bit. But the point is that our students that need to develop the math skills to get into university and then succeed and develop the skills for our evolving economy aren't getting them. And so that needs to be addressed in how we end up developing our curriculum. So I would do the same as Jason, as we expect and as I'm sure we will see, the NDP develop a curriculum that is not going to lead our kids to a greater success and is ideologically driven, that we will have to go back to the drawing board once again. But at the same time, I'm just going to take a bit of a right turn here, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about social promotion in schools. You know, our teachers, I just want to say, will do an excellent job of attuning each of our kids as they learn. Our teachers can oftentimes have up to 19 different learning plans in a classroom of 25 or 26 kids. They deserve a lot of credit for how finely tuned they can teach each of these various kids. So social promotion as a blanket policy is something that sounds good, you know, to stop. But frankly, the research does show that it impacts our kids' development. There's a higher dropout rate in our school system. And they lose their confidence in who they are as individuals and will make them more successful in society. So, anyway, bit of a sidebar, but just wanted to get that out there. Thanks.
And the same question to Mr. Jean. Mr. Jean, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Dave. The question was, how do we keep politics out of our education system and not politicize our children? The answer is, lead by example. That's exactly what I will do. You see, we need more focus on what makes our children proud to be an Albertan. That means that we can keep them busy by focusing on real things that will help them and make them competitive so that they can pay for us when we become seniors and need them. The fastest demographic right now in growth is seniors. They have outpaced youth. And we need to make sure our youth is competitive so that they can take care of us when we get to be that age. I will tell you, my focus will be on reversing the NDP's ideological curriculum changes immediately. We will get back to the basics. Core skills, math, science, literacy. My friends, we must improve financial literacy. We must improve history literacy and energy literacy. If we don't teach our children all about who they are and what they should be proud of as an Albertan, we're going to have the Leonardo DiCaprios of this world teaching them for us. And that's unacceptable. You see, as the Member of Parliament from Fort McMurray for 10 years, and MLA for 2.5, I know what it's like to be the whipping boy for people of ideology, of false ideology, talking about things that aren't true. That's why to teach our kids, we need to make sure that they have a balanced approach on education. But the balanced approach should make sure that parents are in charge and it's the best education available in the world. Thank you.
All right, contestants, thank you very much. There being no rebuttals, we'll move on to our next series of questions. We'll talk about health care. Let's talk about what has been described as the third rail of Alberta politics, health care. The NDP government has budgeted $21.5 billion for health care in this fiscal year, edging ever closer to half of all spending, at or near the top of all provinces. We've been talking about the sustainability and efficiency of healthcare delivery for decades. I have stacks of reports on my desk from countries that have made their system work far better than ours, usually through a mix of public and private healthcare delivery. So, what is your plan to improve wait times and health outcomes generally? Mr. Jean, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Dave. Well, it's no secret that I got into healthcare because the system failed my son and failed my family. And I don't want the same thing to happen to you that happened to us. Truly, my friends, 95% of all people that go into HS get great service. And the people are incredible. I spent 4 months watching my son die in the Alberta healthcare system. And they were great. The front line was fantastic. But it's the system that needs to change. Even the Auditor General here in Alberta just months ago said that Albertans are paying for the best health care. Why wouldn't they demand the best? We are. If you look at all of the comparisons across the world, at the OECD countries, for instance, and if you rank the top 30 against Alberta, we're in the very lowest in outcomes. And I mean the very lowest. And how expensive are we? We're in the very top. That's unacceptable. We do not get a proper return on investment for the taxpayers that work so hard for their money and expect better when they're And my friends, whether it's the justice system or the education system or the health system, it's not that important until you're involved. And that's why I'm so involved. And that's why I believe you should be so involved as well. You see, I have put forward a very detailed 50-point plan that has been endorsed by frontline experts, frontline doctors, and frontline nurses right across this province. Just 2 weeks ago, I talked to one of them, and they said it's the most comprehensive health policy that's ever been put out by any politician in Alberta. We need to stop being afraid to talk about solutions and work on solutions to make our children, our grandparents, and ourselves healthier all the time. And we can do it, but we must have better expectations from our government. I will do that.
The same question to Mr. Callaway. You have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Dave. You know, I've got 3 nurses in my family. My sister, probably foremost amongst them, and my aunt, who is also quite vocal on these issues with me. Always full of suggestions in a political family. But I've also had 3 deaths in my family this year, and I can say that it is the front lines that do treat our elderly and our sick with absolute wonderful care and attention. The healthcare system will be there for you when you need it. The unfortunate part is the wait times that people are dealing with to get, well, in fact, Dave, I think you did radio ads one time about citing that issue. But the problem is we're not focused on the outcomes. The problem is the structure of the system. And the Auditor General did release a good report earlier this year, and it did note that attempts at reforming healthcare have been failing. There's been politicization of it. It's been an attempt to take the politics out of it. We've had the super board. We've had even Ralph Klein was attempting to fix it until the raging grannies got to him at the end. But the fact is there are solutions out there that Auditor General report does talk about it. You know, we've got a fragmented structure. We've got a lack of integration at the physician and the service level. We've got a lack of sharing and use of clinical info. And it's really quite something. If you read out page 47 of that report, it actually highlights and provides comparison of the problems in that system. So we actually have the answers. The thing is, we just need the political fortitude and strength to actually follow through and implement the changes. That's all we really need. And it's about oversight. It's not about political micromanagement. And just one last thing. In 2009, when I was president of the Wild Rose Party, get talking to folks, and I ran into one nurse. And at that time, they were trying to get costs under control. And she told me she actually got a call from the minister's office asking her whether she actually needed those stethoscopes that she ordered. I don't think that was a solution for healthcare. Thank you.
Mr. Galloway, thank you. And the same question to Mr. Kenney. You have 2 minutes.
Well, Dave, like Brian, my family has experienced an inexplicable tragedy in this health system, the most expensive in Canada. My father, 7 years ago, waited for 15 hours sitting in a chair in an emergency ward waiting for somebody to see him and died that day effectively without care. How does that happen in the most expensive healthcare system in Canada, which has one of the most expensive publicly administered systems in the world? My dad, if he was picked out off the sidewalk as a heroin addict, would have been treated faster in a county hospital in Detroit than he was here in Calgary. We have brilliant and often heroic frontline workers, but the system, as my colleagues have said, simply isn't working. You know, we've increased health spending by 340% since 1998. Have outcomes increased by that? No, they've diminished. We are in the middle of the pack. In fact, we have the worst wait times in the country except for the Atlantic Canadian provinces with serious constraints. And so, first of all, 30 years ago we had local hospital boards, and then one big mega provincial board, and then local regional boards, and then a re-centralized provincial board. And every time the accordion moves in and out, a new level of internal bureaucracy is created, people who push paper and ration resources but do not treat patients. We need to get those resources out to the frontline workers who actually do care for patients. And we need more choices. We need more competition. British Columbia and Quebec have the least expensive health systems in the country with some of the best outcomes. It's not a coincidence. They have the most private options and choices and competition. If a privately run clinic in Alberta can perform surgeries for less than a government-run hospital, then we should contract the private clinic to do it. Let's move beyond dogma. Let's move towards care. Access to a waiting list is not access to health care.
And the same question to Mr. Schweitzer. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
You know what? You can hear a lot of similar responses up here. A lot of us are on the exact same page when it comes to healthcare. The AHS model is broken. We know that. We need to get back to decentralized decision-making in Alberta. We also have to get back to innovating. One of the most heartbreaking stories that I've heard just traveling the province over the last 3-4 months happened in Red Deer. A doctor had a heart attack in the hospital, and they could not treat him in Red Deer, notwithstanding the fact that the community has been lobbying for years to get that exact same service that he needed into their community. So they had to put him in an ambulance, drive him up to Edmonton, had another heart attack on the way. And now he has to go through further rehab. Could have been cut off, could have been addressed. You hear so many times, particularly in central Alberta, on that issue alone. If you have a heart attack, don't go to Red Deer where your closest hospital is. Hop in that ambulance and get yourself to Edmonton or Calgary as fast as you humanly can. That is unacceptable in this province, completely unacceptable. And that type of decision wouldn't have been made if we had decentralized decision-making in this province. We have to get back to that, empowering our communities. They know what's best. The other piece of it is, too, we have to get back to innovating. And whether that's through third parties, private care, that's strongly publicly funded. I've seen this in my professional career. Hip and knee surgeries do not all need to be provided in a hospital that's there to provide all types of services. So many of them can be provided better, faster, cheaper. And if the private option is there, we need to take advantage of it and use it. Same thing goes for technology. The technology is there now to allow us to have electronic records for us. It's safe, it's secure. We need to look at that to innovate and allow us to be competitive and get the most out of every dollar. Thank you very much.
We have other health care questions. Any rebuttals, gentlemen? We'll move on if there are not. Mr. Jean.
There are too many layers of managers in HS. We have one manager for almost 5 employees. Now, my friends, there are many things we can do for AHS to streamline efficiencies and to get things going. The first we need to do is get rid of the $1 billion in sole source contracts. The second is to get rid of the $1 billion spent on consultants. We do need to get our e-records working again. Do you know there's over 1,000 different software systems and none of them speak to each other? How can you expect a doctor in one area of the province to be able to talk to a hospital or a specialist when they can't even talk to each other through software? My friends, the system is broken so far back that what we need to do is reorganize it, restructure it, and fix it. We can fix this system. It didn't break overnight. It's going to take some time. But if we empower our front lines, our doctors, our nurses, our experts, our administrators, we will do this if we do it together. But we have to start today, not sometime long, far in the future. Thank you.
And Mr. Kenney, you have 1 minute. Mr. Kenney, go ahead.
Dave, right now there is a critical court case going on in British Columbia. Several years ago, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in the Shaoli case that the security of the person guaranteed by the Charter was being infringed by the Quebec health system by not giving Mr. Shaoli timely access to critical health care, and that he had a charter right to go outside the state system for public reimbursement for privately provided care. Now, unfortunately, that case only applied to Quebec under the Quebec Charter. Right now, there's a case where the Cambie Clinic in Vancouver is being sued by the Nurses Union to shut that place down. And the government of Alberta should be an intervener in that case to stand up and say that we Albertans deserve the same rights, the same freedoms, and the same choices as Quebecers have under the Charter for our healthcare system.
All right, and moving on to another healthcare question, if there are no more rebuttal requests. It is always said that, well, at least you've got your health. But what if you don't? The population of Albertans over the age of 65 is approaching 25%. The number of super seniors, those in their mid-80s, has doubled in the last decade. Most of us have parents or grandparents in that age group. Eventually, the healthcare system will have to deal with Albertans who can no longer take care of themselves or who have expensive healthcare issues in their latter years. This could mean long-term care. The NDP government promised 2,000 more long-term care beds, but only a fraction of that number have been produced. Do you believe there are affordable ways for the healthcare system, which includes hospitals, home care, long-term care, whatever? Are there affordable ways to deal with what has been described as the gray tsunami? Mr. Callaway, you go first. You have 2 minutes.
Sure. Well, obviously, we've been dealing with this issue in this province for several years now. And frankly, there's some people who end up being able to afford wonderful seniors care. We've also got a lot of wonderful healthcare professionals that are supporting our seniors as they get older and actually are supporting them through their process in their final years. And I do believe that the healthcare system is there for our seniors if you actually truly need them. But I know my granny who passed away earlier this year in Cochrane. She received tremendous care, but unfortunately at the very end, they ended up finding her on a Sunday morning. She'd had a stroke and passed away about a day and a half later. There wasn't enough people actually on staff to actually come and check on her and see her. And unfortunately, there's too many stories about that like that out there. In fact, there was a tragic story in Killam here just at the end of August of abuse with a couple of seniors. So there does need to be some more funding towards supporting our seniors in our care systems. But it's also developing the facilities so that we're not splitting up our grandparents and our parents at the end of their lives. So with that, I think we need to introduce some tax incentives in some ways. I am a finance guy. That is my go-to stick that I think would actually support and develop some more of those long-term care facilities, and especially in our rural communities. That's really where I hear a lot of this is the biggest issue. Thank you.
And the same question to Mr. Jean. Mr. Jean, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, David. It comes down to reorganization. Our healthcare system costs have quadrupled in 16 years. Quadrupled. It is a tsunami coming towards us. Seniors are outpacing the youth in our demographic, and if we don't do some reorganizations immediately, we're going to be in big trouble. You see, right now, many places around Alberta have seniors in hospitals. Many hospitals cost up to $15,000 a day to keep a patient in them, depending on where they are and what hospital. That's not a good use of money. What we need, and we've been doing that in Fort McMurray for years, what we need is aging-in-place centers so that our seniors aren't diverse by nursing home, so our seniors aren't being divorced by nursing home, and that's what's happening. You see, if one senior needs different needs than their partner, they put them in 2 different centers in 2 different places. That has to stop immediately. We cannot do this to our seniors. But the Auditor General has clearly said, and I quote, that our system is failing and more money is not the answer, end quote. So what we need to do is change the incentives to reward prevention and to use the cost-effective professionals like nurses, like nurse practitioners, like midwives, like dietitians in our healthcare system, including with seniors. I believe prevention is a big part of our future if we do it right. Because if you just try to cure patients, you're missing such an opportunity in healthcare for everyone. And we need to make sure we do this for everyone. Thank you.
And the same question for Mr. Schweitzer. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Brian and I are on a very similar page on this one here. I mean, the whole point of this, so many Albertans have built communities. They've built communities. They should be able to retire in those communities that they've built. And too many times, I agree, Brian, I hear this every day. We talk to people where their parents are in 2 different facilities. It causes stress on them. They're taking care of their own kids. They're taking care of their parents as well in those facilities. And it's just simply unacceptable. We have to explore different private options to provide for the delivery that we need. Right now, there's that bottleneck in our hospitals. They can't allow these people to leave because there's no space for them to go to. Why would we allow this to happen in the AHS model? We need to allow for that decentralization to happen. It's fundamental to the success of this in the long run. We need to empower those social entrepreneurs. They're ready. They're willing to provide these services. It's time for us to empower them to get the job done. The other piece of this, too, that doesn't get talked about enough, and Conservatives quite often, we talk about debt and we talk about balancing our budget, but we don't always talk about why. We don't talk about why. With the debt ballooning to over $90 billion in this province, the debt carrying costs of that alone, $2 to $3 billion. That's the equivalent of 2 new hospitals, one in Calgary, one in Edmonton, those mega hospitals, a year. That's completely unacceptable. So we as Conservatives need to tell our story as to why we need to get our economy going, balance our books to provide the health care that all Albertans deserve, including our seniors.
And the same question for Mr. Kenney. You have 2 minutes.
Dave, I agree with everything that my colleagues have said here. And what we need is a system that ensures compassionate care, especially for elderly couples, and doesn't end up with seniors and acute care wards consuming resources at sometimes thousands of dollars a day, when with the more creative use of the scope of practice of nurses, of caregivers, of home care, we could help provide care for them for so much less. But fundamentally, you're right, the population is aging dramatically. We've now hit the demographic time bomb that we've all talked about for decades is going off right now. And that is why we cannot delay any longer. The kind of reforms that I was talking about to our healthcare system, it now consumes 45% of public spending. With the aging of our population and the velocity of the growth rate in health spending, we're set for it to consume 50 and then 60%. Where will the funding come from for education or healthcare or any other services? And that is why we need to move beyond dogma to care in our healthcare system. We can no longer afford to just repeat the same kind of nostrums we have been for 50 years, where everything has to be rationed according to a complete state monopoly. We need more competition and more innovation, more flexibility in the system so that we can provide care for an aging population without going broke.
And any rebuttals, gentlemen? We'll move on to our next topic. Jeff, you may have something, Mr. Callaway.
Yeah, and I agree with the folks here, but just for everyone's benefit, there's page 47 of this Auditor General report that was released on the healthcare system this year, and it's just really is something to put in your minds to visualize the state of our system. And it's titled, "If your bank operated like the Alberta healthcare system." The bank would have over 1,300 IT systems. Each branch would have its own. The system would be so outdated, it would be at imminent risk of failure. Each branch would have no access to one another's information. Imagine that. In another city, you would be asked to open an account there first. Online banking wouldn't exist. You'd have no direct access to your financial data, and to obtain an account balance, you'd have to make a written request and wait a couple of weeks for the information to arrive in the mail. Bank managers would lack information to know how individual bank branches are performing. It's crazy, folks.
Mr. Callaway,
Heavily.
thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Jean, you have 1 minute.
I just want to be clear with everyone. We are in a situation where we're spending $10 billion more a year than what we bring in. It means that what we can't do is spend more money on something that is obviously so essential. The only way we can do this is to empower the private sector, to work with the public sector, make sure there's safe regulations for our seniors, and all the things that are necessary to keep them safe. But if we leverage the private sector, we can make sure that there's actually good quality seniors care for all Albertans. That's what we need to do.
All right, gentlemen, we'll move on to our next series of questions. While the private sector has lost over 66,000 jobs since the election of the NDP, The public sector has actually added over 30,000 jobs and costs to Alberta taxpayers. At the same time, there have been challenges negotiating new public sector collective agreements as unions demand more while taxpayers expect spending restraint. What would be your approach to public sector employment and collective bargaining? 2 minutes. Mr. Kenney, please.
Dave, since roughly 2004, when the Klein government started to lose a bit of focus, we have seen collective bargaining agreements increase compensation in the government sector faster than inflation or population growth or growth in the economy. And this is how we've ended up with the most expensive provincial government in Canada by a country mile. We simply can't continue. Public sector compensation in British Columbia is about 20% less in a province with a higher cost of living, with better outcomes in things like healthcare. So we simply need to find the efficiencies that our system lacks. We have to start with attrition. I did this as a federal minister, oversaw a 8% reduction in operating expenditures in one department and 6% in another, primarily through attrition in the public sector. I think in the long run, Dave, we need to move to fair pensions in the public sector for future employees that are self-funding. And what we have to stop is the crazy ideology of the NDP. They're prepared to spend $200 million to buy laundry machines so they can move jobs from a efficient private sector contractor into the state sector. And you know why they're doing that. It's so that their buddies in the AUPE can get mandatory union dues to support the NDP. It's the same reason they're going to spend $50 million in penalties to move lab workers from an efficient private operation into the state sector, so they can generate more NDP-affiliated union dues. We need to look out for the taxpayer, and we also need to repeal the NDP's attack on workplace democracy, to restore a mandatory secret ballot voting for union certification, and I believe we should bring in a legal requirement that union members must be allowed to opt in before any of their union dues fund political activity.
And the same question to Mr. Schweitzer. You have 2 minutes.
Public sector compensation in Alberta is simply out of control. You're going to hear that a lot from all of us here, and we have to get it under control. I'm a restructuring lawyer. I turn companies around for a living. And we proposed in this campaign what we call our 963 plan. It's going to save us over $500 million a year in public sector compensation. And the way that that works, it's the same strategy that you use at companies that are struggling to make their payrolls. Management, in this case here, politicians, will take a 9% wage reset or reduction. People on the Sunshine List making $120,000 and up, 6%. And people below that, 3%. It's going to save us $500 million. We simply have to have these discussions and negotiate this under the collective agreements. It's not going to be easy, but at the same time, the trade-off is that we're not going to fire anybody. No one's getting laid off. We want them to work with us on finding ways to innovate in how we deliver our services in this province. The strategies work. It works in the private sector. We can bring those exact same principles to the government and how we negotiate. Because people want their jobs. They want to make sure that they have security in their lives. And things like too, people in the public sector are not oblivious to what's happening. Nurses, they see people that are stressed. Their spouse may be in the oil and gas industry. And they've seen job losses. They're friends. They're not oblivious to it. But if we can give them the security that there won't be layoffs, but we'll put a hiring freeze in place when it comes to management, they're going to work with us, and we're going to get that deal done, and we're going to save the public sector $500 million a year. Thank you.
And Mr. Jean, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Dave. It's no secret that this policy has been with me for over 2 years now. I've been putting forward this policy for quite a while. You see, I am a litigator. I have been a lawyer for 25 years, 10 years as a litigator, like Doug. And I keep my eye on issues like this and cases like this. And there have been 2 new cases that have come out in the last 8 months that deal with this and have changed the pendulum swing a little bit more towards governments. And I believe that, simply put, that we are in a better negotiating point today than we were a year ago. But that doesn't mean that these people are our enemies. In fact, the exact opposite. These people serve us, Albertans. And we need to make sure that we do this together. Now, freeze salaries, freeze positions. And because there's so many managers, what we need to do is make sure that when a manager leaves, we don't rehire a manager, we restructure. That's the first thing. These people are not our enemies. They are our friends, and we need to work with them to find a place where they're reasonable expenses. Right now, the government of Alberta, with about 6,800 managers and 20,000 employees, that's a 1-to-3 ratio. That's not reasonable. In fact, frankly, it's ridiculous. We do need to be tough in negotiations, but we have to act in good faith. We do have to work together with all Albertans to solve our fiscal problems, and we need to do this through attrition, not through frontline cuts or any cuts for that matter. We can do it because 8% of the public service leaves every year through attrition. So let's maintain our frontline services, anybody that deals with the public, because we can't afford to wreck our frontline services at all. But what we can do is eliminate the managers that cost us a lot of money and take the time of our frontline workers on things.
Mr. Callaway, 2 minutes, please.
Well, I agree with many of the points of my colleagues here. Doug and I may differ a little bit on this 963 plan, but obviously attrition is a big part of how we're going to have to achieve our savings from the fiscal perspective. But it's also about talking about renegotiation in our working conditions as well. We can end up saving some money through that, not just salary cuts. It may be the hours, it may be the support that our workers have. It could be the perks that they end up having. But it's also in the training that they can receive to be more efficient in the jobs that they can provide. Another thing that I think is important, and again, I come from this financial world, so I have this automatic bias, but I think we need to look at going towards a defined contribution program in our renegotiations of contracts for future employees. I'm not going to get into war with the current defined benefit programs for our current union workers, because they've earned those rights. They've negotiated those in good faith. And that's what we need to honor as conservatives, as contract law. Because if we're going to talk about attracting foreign investors back and people to invest in this province again, we need to respect the contracts that we write. So that's the kind of approach that I would end up taking towards union negotiations going forward in this province. Thank you.
All right, and gentlemen, any rebuttals? Mr. Kenney, you've indicated you will. Go ahead. You have 1 minute.
Well, Dave, I would just point out that even New Democrat governments, like in Saskatchewan and for a long time Manitoba, had greater rigor in managing collective bargaining agreements with their friends in the public sector unions than the PC government did in Alberta here for the past 20 years. So we shouldn't be, because people in the public sector are realists. They understand that we can't tax and borrow our way to prosperity, that our ability to pay for public services depends on a vibrant private sector economy. And so they are willing to be partners, and I think responsible NDP governments have demonstrated that elsewhere. The British Columbia government has been very prudent in the way it's managed collective bargaining agreements for 16 years, which is why they're delivering the same services for 20% less. I'm not saying we can get to that level at any time in the near future, but it's something to aspire to, at least that level of efficiency.
And Mr. Jean, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Dave. I did run out of time there. I will also want to make sure that people recognize that we have to stop unions from raising political money and fighting politics. You see, right now, public unions... Right now in Alberta, public unions have set aside millions of dollars to fight Conservatives in the next election. That's not helpful. And if they want to raise money and participate in politics, then they should raise it voluntarily, just like we all do. Because if you're a United Conservative Party member and you're in a union that's working for the NDP, you should not have your money working against your political interests. And the absolute cornerstone of our democracy is the ability to vote freely your conscience without having people hang over your head, whether they're employers or union members. People in this province that are workers should have the opportunity to vote their conscience freely. Thank you.
And Mr. Schweitzer, go ahead. You have 1 minute.
One other piece of this as well, to make sure that we get the buy-in to the renegotiations that need to happen under these collective agreements. There's a trade-off that goes into those negotiations. I've dealt with unions before on many sophisticated restructuring files. Those negotiations, usually there's a little give and take that goes with it. But really, we have to empower our nurses and our paramedics to use their education properly. So often today, We restrict them out of fear of lawsuits, out of fear of the ability to actually do their jobs. They want to do their jobs. They want to help people. They want to make people healthy again. And if we allow them to use their full education, I believe that that's part of the trade-off in that negotiation, to give people that work quality, that satisfaction in the job that they're looking for right now. So many of them just feel as though their hands are tied behind their backs. They want to be empowered again. And that'll be a big part of that negotiation that we have to enter into. The other piece here too, secret ballots on union certification, just have to bring that back.
In labor relations, the second question will have a similar vein. The NDP government has addressed many changes in the area of labor relations through Bill 6. They brought farm and ranch workers under labor and employment legislation. Through Bill 17, they made significant changes to the Labor Relations Code and the Employment Standards Code. They've introduced essential services legislation and revised the Post-Secondary Learning Act. They're currently revisiting workers' compensation and occupational health and safety legislation. And of course, they've increased minimum wage from $10.20 to $11.20 in 2015 to $12.20 in 2016 and $13.60 on October 1st of this year and to $15, as we know, in 2018. What is your view of these various changes, and what would you do differently if you were the Premier? Mr. Schweitzer, you have 2 minutes.
Starting with the minimum wage. The NDP's $15 an hour minimum wage is going to cost Albertans roughly 25,000 jobs. It's completely unacceptable, completely unacceptable. Our campaign has called on the NDP to freeze it at its current level of $12.20 an hour. And if they go to $15 an hour by 2019, we'll reset that. Those 25,000 jobs are too important. We need to grow our jobs right now. Now, this is a comment for everybody here on stage, and we're not going to get too much into the attacks in this campaign. But earlier this month, Jason Kenney said that rolling back that minimum wage is a complete non-starter. To me, it's a complete non-starter that 25,000 Albertans are going to lose their jobs. Why on earth would the United Conservative Party adopt a policy of $15 an hour if it's going to cost us 25,000 jobs? 25,000 Albertans are waiting right now, wondering, are they going to keep their jobs? 25,000 Albertans are waiting for us to lead. Today is the time to lead. I ask everybody on this stage to clarify the position on the minimum wage.
Our next answer comes from Mr. Kenney. You have 2 minutes.
Well, my position's been crystal clear for 15 months in opposing this reckless, ideological, job-killing increase in the minimum wage, which, according to the CD Howe Institute, will kill 25,000 jobs. But I've listened to employers, including Restaurants Canada and the Chambers of Commerce, who have told me they don't think it's realistic for a government, for a party to run on a platform to lower wages. And one thing I will not do, Doug, listen, I'm in this for us to win and defeat the NDP and get our economy back on track, and I will not risk losing the next election on this. I will not, we have to be principled. We also have to be prudent and win. I will not give the NDP the opportunity to campaign against us, saying that we're going to cut everybody's wages in the next election. What I would do is freeze that minimum wage for as long as necessary for inflation to catch up with it, and find other ways to give relief to small and medium-sized businesses. There might be other ways we can address, for example, servers in the front of hospitality businesses that get tips. We would be creative in addressing. The bottom line, though, is let's not allow the NDP to scare hundreds of thousands of Albertans into saying that the Conservative Party is going to cut their wages. We need, on the other points, though, Dave, we do need to repeal, as I said, the attack on workplace democracy, restore mandatory secret ballot voting for certification. We need to repeal Bill 6. We need a new provision that allows union members to opt in to using their dues to fund political activity. Brian's right. The Alberta Federation of Labour is raising $1 million a year right now to carpet bomb us. And I suspect the majority of AFL members want to vote Conservative in the next election. We should stop them from being forced to fund activities that are contrary to their own convictions.
And on that same question, Mr. Callaway. Mr. Callaway, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, so frankly, I'm going to agree with Jason Kenney here a bit because having built up with the Wild Rose Party from 2008, gone through a couple of elections, and seeing, as I think a lot of people know, the mistakes of various campaigns in the past and how we've lost them as Conservatives, this next election is too important for us to really take any big chances on. We can't afford to make mistakes of either tactics or strategy or comments in the media today. But the fact is, we're talking about 25,000 jobs lost due to minimum wage. Well, the NDP's cost is like, let's think big picture here, folks. The NDP has cost us 70,000 jobs across this economy. That's what we need to fix. We got to get rid of the NDP. We got to get this economy back on track. We got to introduce some policies to actually create jobs. That's why I'm talking about my Big Three idea campaign to a natural gas energized economy, finding more access for our exports, bringing capital back to this province. That's what's going to create jobs and fix the problem. And hopefully, if that plan is successful enough, we're not going to be worrying about the $15 minimum wage because everyone's going to be trying to find those workers the way it was 10 years ago. And we can do that again.
And Mr. Jean, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Dave. I have actually, in my history, operated and owned more than a dozen businesses. I understand what it's like to make payroll. It's very difficult for a lot of businesses right now. This minimum wage is going to hurt. And I will tell you that I'm a builder. I believe in finding an opportunity to unify. And in this particular case, it's no different. You see, I believe that we cannot roll back our minimum wage, but what we can do is provide exemptions. You see, as somebody that's literally employed hundreds and hundreds of people, I know that young people are not going to find jobs anymore, anybody under 18. We need to provide an exemption for them, an exemption for staff that work in restaurants, work in hotels, other industries. But it won't be me deciding that, and what I've promised to do is to set up a panel of industry, of organized labor, and a group that will find the way to make us most competitive. You see, that's what it's all about. To be competitive, we need to be more competitive than other jurisdictions, including jurisdictions right next door called Saskatchewan and British Columbia. We need to be more competitive to jurisdictions in the United States. And when you do this, you can see the empirical data of bringing in a minimum wage that's too high. Lots of people lose jobs. Look at Australia. Look at how expensive it is to go out and eat. Look at even Washington and the minimum wage that was brought in there. This minimum wage is not good, just like Bill 6 is not good. And I can tell you, as a person that sat on the steps and stood on the steps of the legislature in minus 20 degrees with hundreds and hundreds of Albertans and rallied against Bill 6 each and every day in the legislature, that I will repeal Bill 6 immediately upon getting elected. There are some good things that we need to do, but competition in WCB is one of them. Listen, my friends, as a lawyer that worked for over 10 years litigating in Alberta, there's more complaints that come from WCB than all the rest of the government combined. Why would we include them with farmers and ranchers? Ridiculous.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jean. And in this rebuttal time, Mr. Schweitzer, you've indicated you'll have 1 minute.
Thank you very much. The next election campaign is about giving hope to Albertans, that we're going to restore Alberta Advantage. That comes down to making sure that Alberta is the most competitive place in Canada, from offering the largest tax relief in Alberta history, getting our regulations under control, cutting our red tape, to making sure that our wages are competitive. The minimum wage has to be reset, has to be. 25,000 jobs are too many, with people that need it the most. The other aspect, too, of this campaign, for the next election campaign, we have to get the social issues right and turn the page on the past. We're being on the wrong side of history. We have an opportunity right now with this party, this new United Conservative Party, to have a fresh start, the ability to engage young Albertans, to get them excited about this party again. We have to get that done. That's the winning recipe for the next election campaign. That's how we're going to win seats here in Edmonton. That's how we're going to win seats across Alberta. Thank you.
And Mr. Kenney? Mr. Kenney, you have 1 minute.
Doug, with all due respect, as somebody who's actually been elected 7 times with on average 70% of the vote, I can tell you promising hundreds of thousands of people that you're going to cut their wages is not the winning formula for winning an election. But Doug is right. We do have to be remarkably ambitious about renewing the Alberta Advantage. We can't be timid. We need to be bold. And in a couple of the areas you've addressed, Dave, that we need to handle, which are the NDP's, they're looking at radical changes to WCB, occupational health and safety. These things may be boring to some people, like the media, but they represent potentially devastating new cost drivers for businesses. So let's get those things right. Let's reduce the cost burden, the red tape burden. I would appoint a minister whose sole goal is to reduce the regulatory burden in the Alberta economy by 1/3, just like Gordon Campbell did 16 years ago. That one decision was the biggest thing that turned BC from recession to growth.
And in rebuttal, Mr. Callaway, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, you know, we've got an NDP government here, folks, and as Jason just mentioned, they're going through a labor code review. And in talking to some of the folks in industry, just to kind of paint a bit of a picture, going through the occupational health and safety code review, and talking to some of the guys at least in the energy patch, and some of the things that they were worried about seeing. And so it's, as we've talked about Bill 6, we'd all kill Bill 6, and we talked about some of the ridiculous things that they were potentially making our farmers and farm kids to do, but the same thing extends to people working on the rigs. Anyone who you go out, you work a long day, you're drilling a well. This isn't like 1950s manufacturing plant. You blow the whistle and everyone goes home. You keep drilling the well and you keep going. This is kind of what our Alberta economy is built on. It's that work ethic and continuing to see the job done. That's not what these NDP consultants understand coming from Toronto to rewrite our work codes.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. The next question will come, as we indicated earlier, from the membership of the United Conservative Party. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jean. You have a minute in rebuttal. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Jean.
Thanks, Dave. First of all, I would encourage everybody to go to brianjean.ca and look at the policy initiatives that I put forward. I put forward detailed policy on health, on education, and even cutting taxes, regulatory improvements. And I will, if I have the privilege of being your premier, immediately cut the corporate tax from 12% down to 11%, and then in the first year down to 10%. I'll immediately cut small business taxes. I'll immediately cut small business taxes in half to make it the most competitive small business tax that we can possibly have, and hopefully move that to zero. And yes, the Campbell government in BC did empower each and every one of his ministers to cut regulatory oversight by 33%, and within 4 years, they got it down to 37%. And we've seen, even in BC, an economy flourish because of regulatory improvement reduced and taxes reduced. That's where we need to go. That's the only way to make our economy more competitive for the future. Thank you.
And as we mentioned earlier, questions have been submitted by our UCP membership. We have chosen one from UCP member Darren Price. By shutting down coal-fired power plants before an alternative supply of energy is introduced, what will the impact be, in your opinion, on Albertans? Mr. Jean, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think it's exactly what's happened in Ontario. You're going to see energy prices more expensive than mortgages. That's what's happening there, and that's also what's happening to their industry. All the industry is moving out of Ontario, manufacturing, all the plant sites, because energy prices are too expensive. That's not the way we can go. We must go a different way. I would bring back coal to compare with other jurisdictions in Alberta or in Canada and in the United States. We have this fellow down south that's called Trump. And what he's doing right now is he's dismantling all of those policies that previous presidents brought into play. And the only way we can have a successful economy is to be competitive with the United States. Just a few years ago, they were our biggest customer. But today, the U.S. is our biggest competitor. What I believe we should do is take our coal-fired plants, and certainly there's going to be some that are changed over to natural gas, I understand that, but the ones that have the opportunity to move back into coal, and I've talked to several operators and owners, and there are some in both camps, I believe we have to give them the opportunity to bring back coal and to take our great technology here in Alberta, the smokestacks, what we do to clean our coal before it goes out. I've toured many of these facilities, and they are amazing. We need to take that technology, create more Alberta jobs, and send it to China and India, where these people always complain about us, but don't do anything about their own backyard. It's got to stop.
Mr. Callaway, same question. You have 2 minutes.
Well, this is more back to my wheelhouse a little bit. I am going to go kill the carbon tax. That's a full stop and done deal. I think we all agree with that. But as Conservatives, I mentioned before about not just what we're against, but what we're for, and that's why I actually talk about this natural gas energized economy. I actually tweeted out yesterday that the price of natural gas on the spot market was actually about 8 cents a GJ. The day before it was minus 10 cents a GJ. We've got an abundance of this so just so everyone understands, that means a producer would actually have to pay to sell their gas. That's the kind of abundance that we have of natural gas in this economy. If we use natural gas in our electricity production, if we use it in our transportation systems, if we can use it in developing our petrochemical systems or our petrochemical industry, we can produce more DME, we could get longer recovery rates out of our SAGD, our oil sands operations, our in situ underground oil sands operations. But these are all ideas that would end up generating a lot of jobs, all spread throughout the economy, especially as I look in eastern Alberta. Fill up those empty service shops, the industrial bays that are empty right now. I talk about in Brooks, there's an industrial facility that's there right now, 60,000 square feet. It's empty. It used to be filled with oil and gas service companies. Now it's actually the Brooks baseball team that uses it for winter batting practice. We've got something wrong in this economy. But natural gas can be a key to actually reducing our emissions, reducing our NOx and SOx, reducing our particulates, putting people to work across this entire province. It's going to generate more in royalties. It's going to generate more in municipal income taxes that our municipalities need to fund their operations, to fund their roads. That's the kind of solution and thinking and the big ideas that I'm talking about. But from let's kill the carbon tax. Let's hope we can get the coal plants back in operation again. I would join Saskatchewan in fighting the Trudeau government and going to war against that $50 per ton regulated price. That's a full stop. Thanks. I'm sure these guys will pick up on that point too.
And on the question from our member, Mr. Kenney, you have 2 minutes.
The question was, what will the impact be of this ideological rush to shut down our coal industry? The answer is the impact will be devastating. Devastating on our coal towns and industry. Devastating for tens of thousands of families who can only put food on the table because of that industry. And devastating to our long-term economic prospects. They're talking about a rush to shut down a reliable and inexpensive form of power production that produces power at about 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and then replacing it with unreliable forms of production that cost 10 to 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And then, because the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine 24/7 in Alberta, they'll have to spend billions in support to create backup baseload power from natural gas. Altogether, some estimates suggest this is a $30 billion transition that, guess what, will be paid for by you, by taxpayers and ratepayers, making it less likely that we will diversify the economy. Do you think Amazon is more or less likely to come to Alberta with 50,000 workers in logistics, shipping, and warehousing, before or after the carbon tax, before or after higher power prices? How are we going to attract major investors in manufacturing and in agribusinesses if we're massively increasing one of their primary input costs, which is power? That's what's happened in Ontario under the devastating high power price policy of that government. So I would stop the NDP's premature shutdown of coal in its tracks. By the way, the NDP has lied about the human health effects of coal plants. The leading epidemiologist in the province has done 2 studies saying no measurable negative effect on air quality. And Brian's absolutely right. We need to continue improving clean coal technology that we can export to the rest of the world that is planning on building between 1,600 and 2,300 new coal-fired plants around the world. Let's do our part with that technology.
And Mr. Schweitzer, you have 2 minutes.
The biggest part of this that we can't forget about is the human element. People on the stage have traveled across this province, and a lot of us have visited the coal towns and communities impacted by these policy changes that the NDP have brought in. These families have been in these communities sometimes for generations. They feel completely upended, completely upended. They don't know what's going to happen next. What does the future look like for them? The rug's completely been pulled out from underneath their feet, completely. So the first thing that we need to do, we don't quite know yet what we're going to inherit in 2019. We don't know yet how far the NDP is going to go. But what we can do is give Albertans security in knowing that within that first 100 days in office, we will pull together the experts, we'll pull together people from across Alberta, consult properly, and make sure that we have cheap, affordable, and reliable power in this province. The last thing Albertans want is another Ontario. And I agree with my friends. If the technology's there and it makes sense, let's use it. Doesn't mean you have to completely go away with coal, but let's use the technology if it's there. The other thing, too, I think we have a lot of commonality up here. Step one as well is going to be making sure we get rid of the NDP carbon tax and we take it to Ottawa in the courts. But really, this fundamentally comes down to just a change in ideology from the NDP approach. Conservatives believe in market-based approaches, taking a look at the evidence and what's in the best interest of our communities. Let's get back to doing that. There's a reason why we have a successful power generation in Alberta. Let's get back to those fundamentals. Let's get back to doing this right. Thank you.
And in rebuttal, gentlemen, Mr. Jean, go ahead.
We have nothing to apologize to the world for. We have the cleanest air, cleanest water, and cleanest land in the entire planet. I am sick of know-all Hollywood types coming and telling us what is our business. The NDP have spent $4.1 billion, or allocated that much, to change our electricity grid and shut down coal. Just one more example of $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and it has to stop. Let's wipe out the carbon tax. Yes. Let's look at natural gas. Yes, it's cheaper. But let's monitor our water, our earth, our land, and make sure that our citizens are better off. Let's make sure that we can show the world what we can do right here in Alberta, and they'll take it over for right where they are. That's what we need to do. Be the best example possible.
And Mr. Kenney, go ahead.
Well, Dave, what the NDP is doing is creating a blank check for intermittent, unreliable forms of power production. Listen, if wind and solar become effective in terms of their technology at some point in the future, great. We'd all like to have more renewable sources of power. And eventually there will naturally be a conversion to natural gas. But right now, coal produces between 40 and any given day, 40 to 50% of the power that we consume. Now, if we want to talk about getting back the Alberta advantage, it means competitive taxes, regulatory environment, labor costs, and power prices. So this is essential to our long-term future, including in a post-petroleum world at some point in the long-distant future. But I agree with my colleagues, the first thing we start with as bill number 1 in the United Conservative government is the Carbon Tax Repeal Act.
And Mr. Callaway, you now have 1 minute.
Well, I think we've all been asked, when we're going to kill the carbon tax, and I think we've all said within the first 100 days. I think we could all probably agree day 1. Yeah? Yeah. All right. But the fact is, it's interesting looking at some of the international markets. Australia's actually seeing an increase in coal prices right now. Why? They hardly even have enough to supply themselves. Why? Because they're shipping it all to China to fill the Chinese plants. Meanwhile, in Alberta, we are shutting down our coal plants. This is insanity. The second thing is we've got power prices right now about $22 a megawatt. This has been a long-term advantage for the development of our industry across this province, literally for decades. We're going to see power prices literally on the forward curve right now triple next year. They're going a lot higher than that. It's a market-based system. And the government is trying to cover this up with little shenanigans and magic tricks that they're trying to pull, like daylight savings discussions. But really, the Balancing Pool borrowed $2.5 billion last year to cover up their insane power policies.
Mr. Callaway, thank you. And 1 minute in rebuttal, Mr. Schweitzer.
Albertans are tired of being held back. They're tired of apologizing. Albertans are used to setting the agenda in Canada. It's about time that we did that again. We have an amazing story to tell in this province. From the land reclamation technologies being developed in the oil sands, to to the water purification systems that are being developed right here. The world needs more of Alberta and our environmental technologies. It's time to stop apologizing for it and time to start to lead on it. That's really fundamentally where it comes down to.
And contestants, as we said, a question has come in from social media, people watching tonight, live broadcast. How do we bring back investor confidence in Alberta? Fundamental question. First to answer this one, Mr. Callaway, you have 2 minutes.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I kind of referenced this a little bit earlier when we were talking about negotiating with the unions, but it's sanctity of contract law, and unfortunately we haven't had nearly as much of that in this province as we should have. But that's why I've been talking about my big 3 ideas in this province. We've got too much over-regulation. That's absolutely part of it. We're preventing companies from investing. They're spending too much time on reviews and dealing with the government. Husky, I know, has said that it takes them 4 years to develop a SAGD project on this side of the border, and it takes them 4 months in Saskatchewan. That's hundreds of millions of dollars and literally tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in royalties and income taxes and job growth that we can have in this province. But my plan, actually, my number 3 big idea is actually about bringing capital back to Alberta. We've seen an exodus of companies leaving. They're pulling up stakes. They're going elsewhere to other investment hotspots like Nigeria and Iran. This is crazy, folks. This is the NDP for you. What they're doing to economics and projects and investor confidence in this province. So while I talk about, you know, again, a natural gas energized economy, keeping our power prices low, really bringing investment back to Alberta. I've got a tax-free investment structure that I've developed with some securities lawyers and tax lawyers that would actually do that. It's the kind of thing that the investors that are looking at Alberta for that, to get them back into this province again, regardless of the sector, be it energy or forestry or mining or manufacturing or whatever it is, but it would invest in capital projects, capital that stays in Alberta, capital that also could be invested in research and development for either our medical sector or technology sector. Those are the kinds of things, the jobs that we'll be having to fulfill. And when we're talking about education and STEM today, that's what we need our education system designed to actually support and staff in the years down the road. So that's actually how I believe that we can bring capital back to Alberta and bring investors back to Alberta, which is how this province achieved its great levels of growth over these past decades.
And the same question to Mr. Jean. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Dave. I think the number 1 thing that I can do is if you elect me as your leader, I will defeat the NDP in the next election, and that will get investor confidence back to a great start. But we need to show strong signals to the international community. We need to show them that we've got our fiscal house in order, both the spending side and building the economy. To build the economy, we would immediately remove the cap on oil sands. We would lower taxes for individuals, lower taxes for small businesses, for big businesses, and make sure that we reduce regulation, because that is one of our major problems. You see, we are one of the highest regulated jurisdictions in the world for oil and gas and other industries. If we're so highly regulated, it takes so much longer and so much more effort and work and resources to get the applications approved and to start the process. And my friends, things that can happen in Texas in 2 weeks take 9 or 10 months here in Alberta. Things that can happen in 4 months in Saskatchewan take 9 or 10 months here in Alberta. That's not reasonable. We need to cut the red tape, we need to lower taxes, and we need to make sure that people see that we've got our fiscal house in order. That means, and if you look at my website, you'll see, I put forward a very detailed plan, immediately $2.6 billion in savings, and that would be the same thing that I proposed in the budget in 2017. We would appoint a fiscal reform commission of experts and industry leaders to immediately find savings while protecting frontline services. I believe if we empower the private sector and work with the public sector, all Albertans can come together and unite, and we can move forward into a better economy. Even our public sector workers know that something is wrong. Wherever I go across the province, I hear from nurses and teachers that support me, that want us to take over this government, and we will beat the NDP in the next election. Thank you.
And also the same question, 2 minutes, to Mr. Schweitzer, please.
Thank you very much. This is the fundamental premise of our campaign. How do we turn things around in this province? Give that next generation hope that they're going to have the exact same opportunities that so many of us in this room have enjoyed. That's why on day one, we're proposing the largest tax relief in Alberta history. I won't go into all the details on it. One thing I will say is go to dougschweitzer.com. And if you can't spell dougschweitzer.com, go to dougforalberta.com. A little bit of feedback on the last name. The other piece of it is that we have to get back to balancing our budget. And we can offer the largest tax relief in Alberta history if we go to a flat budget for the first term. So what we're proposing to do is basically inheriting a bloated budget from the NDP, spending about $2,700 more per capita than British Columbia, simply hold it flat for 4 years. If we do that, we'll balance the budget in our first term, restore investor confidence. The other piece of it as well, as you heard up here, is the regulatory burden in Alberta. Canadian Federation of Independent Business gave Alberta an F, dead last in the country. That can't stand. We can't allow that. Our eye's been off the ball. So our campaign has proposed a 2-for-1 policy being done in Manitoba right now. For every new regulation on business, repeal 2 on business, as well as work with our stakeholders to make sure that we bring in best practices. Take a look at examples from British Columbia to across this country to make sure we get the best regulatory regime in the country. If we do that, we'll restore confidence. I work in the private sector. I've worked on multi-billion-dollar cross-border restructurings and transactions. The market needs confidence that Alberta's back in business, and we need to send that message clearly on day one. Thank you.
And the same question to Mr. Kenney. 2 minutes, please.
Dave, in the last year alone, we've lost $34 billion of foreign investment from our oil and gas sector alone, being redeployed in the same sector to other parts of the world. So it's not about price, it's about policy. As Jeff suggested, some of that money went from Alberta to Iran, a dictatorship and state sponsor of terrorism. They thought that was a safer place in which to invest. This is what the NDP has done to Alberta. So job number one for our next government must be restoring investor confidence. I broadly agree with my colleagues. First of all, tax relief, scrapping the carbon tax, getting our other tax rates down as quickly as possible. And by the way, if you want a taxpayer, how about hire the founding executive director of the Alberta Taxpayers Association and former CEO of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation? This is something I've been fighting for my whole life. Appointing a minister like Kevin Falcon and Gordon Campbell's government with a mandate to go through every department, reduce the regulatory burden by a third. It takes over a year for some things to get approved in Alberta that can be approved in Texas in a week. That's ridiculous. Stop the shutdown of coal and the increase in power prices. Bring in the summer of repeal through the legislature, summer of 2019. Repeal Bill 6. Repeal the anti-growth labor laws and other negative NDP policies. A credible plan to balance the budget. Fight like hell for these pipelines to be built so we can get a fair market price for our oil and gas. And go around the world making sure that investors understand that Alberta once again is open for business again.
Thank you all, gentlemen, very much. We will use our rebuttal period as a chance for closing statements as well. And we'll be generous here at the microphone, and we'll allow you up to 3 minutes each.
Whoa.
Up to 3 minutes each. And we will, this is a predetermined order by draw. Mr. Kenney, you just answered the last question, but you'll be first in the closing statement category. Mr. Kenney, you have up to 3 minutes.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks to all of you for participating, not just in the debate, but in the renewal of Alberta democracy. This project is bigger than a conventional campaign. One of the reasons, that's right, one of the reasons we ended up with this accidental socialist government is half of us didn't bother voting, and 95% of us weren't involved in a political party. So an advertisement to people watching online, they've got just under a day to join this growing movement to take our province back, to get Alberta back on track, to renew the Alberta advantage. Dave, 15 months ago, I gave up one of the safest seats in Parliament, my only paycheck, to trek around this province, putting 95,000 clicks on my pickup, doing 850 events, listening to Albertans in every corner of our society. And what I heard from them is they thought the political elites weren't listening, that we had the PC and Wildrose leadership locked into a death spiral, a war of attrition. Who were motivated by the resentments that had built up over a decade of division. But we started this Unite Alberta campaign to be a voice and a vehicle for grassroots free enterprise Albertans who wanted to bury the hatchet, to focus on the future rather than the past, and to put the province ahead of any political parties. And we did that. We did that. You did that on July 22nd with that historic 95% vote. We chose the future. And now on October 28th, we have to choose a leader. I believe we'll need a leader with the right mix of experience, skills, and temperament to hit the ground running as a strong Conservative premier on day one. Somebody who can undo the massive damage of the NDP, restore investor confidence, somebody who's actually reduced hundreds of millions of dollars in government spending. I offer, and somebody who can stand up to Justin Trudeau and defend our province. And so I offer my lifetime of experience from being there on the front lines of the fiscal wars of the 1990s as head of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, to having been a senior minister in Stephen Harper's government, having led profound reforms to what was then a broken immigration system, and creating the skills agenda in the employment ministry, and being Minister of National Defense, who deployed our military to fight the terrorists in the Middle East, and being Minister of Multiculturalism, leading a project that doubled the support for the Conservative Party of Canada amongst New Canadians, and the experience over the past 14 months of having led this project to unite free enterprise Albertans. I offer that experience to you in a spirit of humility and servant leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get her done. Let's get Alberta back on track. Thank you very much.
And our next, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker will be Mr. Schweitzer.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for participating and being here today. And as well, thank you to the fellow candidates for this robust debate that we've had. For me, this goes back to to when my grandparents came to Alberta. They came here after World War I. They came here for land, the opportunity to farm, raise a family, and live in peace. And not much has changed, really, from a family. What you want to have for your children, that opportunity is for them. I take a look now, when I look at my daughters, and the Alberta that I want for them. I want them to look at this province the exact same way that I did when I started my career here. A province that was confident, that knew its place in Canada, that led by example and set the tone across this nation. From spending to taxation, Alberta led the charge. We need to get back to those fundamentals in our province. That's why our campaigns offered the largest tax relief in Alberta history. Not in 2 or 3 years, but on day one. We need to set that example. As well, this campaign and this party is about new opportunities. So many people have come together to make this happen. So many people on the stage have worked so hard to make it happen. I remember the time when I first bought a membership in a political party. How excited I was to bring forward an idea, to bring forward policies that I was passionate about. We can't forget that in this party. That's what divided us over so long, was entitlement. We cannot have that. We need to bring this together. It goes beyond whoever the first leader of this party is. It comes down to people in this room and from Albertans around this province that may be now buying a membership for the first time. You need to bring forward your ideas. This needs to be your party. You need to hold us accountable and make sure that the government of Alberta is the government that you want, the government that reflects your values, your principles. That's the Alberta that I want for my daughters. I believe that's the promise of this party. Thank you very much. I humbly ask for your vote in this election campaign. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Mr. Jean. Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you to all of you coming here tonight. Thank you to all the other leadership contestants. Thank you for the people that watch at home. We're here to give you a better government. We're here to make Alberta better. We're here to stand up for Albertans. My friends, it was almost 2 years ago, November of 2015, when I made a speech to 600 Conservatives in Calgary and told them I had my dancing shoes on, and here we are today. I'm glad that that offer was taken up, and that's why we are here today. Because Albertans, and especially the people that we should thank for being here today, the Wild Rose and the PC members, because they're really the winners today. None of us will win as much as they will. You see, because it's all about taking back control of our government. And whoever you choose has to lead the entire province. Right now, my friends, based on all polls, I'm the only person on this stage that can win even one seat in Edmonton. And I can win up to 10. I am a businessman, owned and operated over a dozen businesses here in Alberta. I've been a litigator and a lawyer for 25 years, arguing in the Court of Queen's Bench and at different levels of all courts in Alberta. And yes, I've even been a member of Parliament for 10 years, working to build legislation to make your lives better. And an MLA. As the only elected person on the stage, I can tell you, it's a difficult thing to make sure that you always are in front of a camera and making people feel that you're doing the best job for them. But I compliment all of these people here today because as the leader of the official opposition for almost 2.5 years, I will tell you it's a difficult job. But every day when I got up, I thought about what it was for. It was so that what happened to me and my family wouldn't happen to you. And yes, I'm talking about my son, but I'm also talking about my house burning down. I'm also talking about 200 criminals being released without a trial. I'm talking about the victims being re-victimized. These are the things that are important, and I am the leader that can get it done. I know that more economic activity means more taxes, means more tax income. So if we can lower our taxes, if we can lower our regulations, we will get more taxes by economic activity. Putting me in charge of this will make sure it happens. And I undertake that I will work with these other gentlemen, if they get elected, to make Alberta the best it can possibly be, and it will always be the best it will be, because I'm here for Albertans, and I will make sure it gets done. Thank you.
And Mr. Callaway, you have your closing statement, please.
Thanks, Dave. Again, I join my colleagues up here. I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, putting your time and effort into this. This is going to take, frankly, all of us to get this province back on track again and get it out of the clutches of the NDP. And I think we've got a great team here. So, and our MLAs I see in the audience today. So I just want to give kudos to each and every one of you. So round of applause, please. You know, I would say that I've spent a lot of time dedicating myself, just strictly as a volunteer, to trying to get this province back on track. My initial motivation was as an investment advisor, working with clients, talking about their issues and challenges that they were facing in their life. It started with the new royalty review that was going to take away a lot of their jobs and impact not just people in the energy sector, but farmers and waiters and waitresses and restaurant owners. And then you start getting involved and you learn about the stories of other folks all across this entire province. And that's the thing that really drives me on, that really reinforces my dedication to Alberta. And I know each and every one of you here feel that dedication to Alberta too. And so as we go forward and look towards this next election, we're frankly we can't afford to actually take or make any mistakes. As we noted earlier, the unions are building a massive bankroll to use against us, and we can't afford to take risks with this next election. The future of our province depends on it. You know, I look at the budget that we're going to be facing in the next that we'll be facing as a new United Conservative government. We're spending $55 billion now. We've got a $10.5 billion deficit. We need some big ideas to actually get this economy growing again while reining in our spending. That's why I'm talking about this big idea campaign I've brought to the table. I'm so glad that people are talking about these various ideas. And as we look at reining in spending, Jason's got his experience in federal parliament. Doug's an insolvency lawyer. I have... We need to win this next election, or he's probably going to quit and just do a lot more work on behalf of Albertans. Sadly. But I would also say, it's about integrity of our own operations. I mean, running the party, I ran deficits, we built up our surpluses, and I know, Brian, unfortunately, we had a caucus deficit that we're still dealing with today. But the fact is, it's about integrity and what Albertans can believe in this next election. So I'm asking for your vote. jeffcallaway.ca. Go check out my website. Check out these big ideas that I'm talking about. And let's build this province together. Thank you very much, everyone.
And thank you, contestants. That concludes our debate for the evening. Thank you all very much. A round of applause for all our contestants, please. And I want to mention our next debate will be in Red Deer on October 3rd. And also, a reminder to the media, leadership contestants will be available here on stage in just a few minutes for individual interviews, and they'll be available in the order in which the random draw will provide them. Thank you, everyone who came out tonight. Thank you all. Good night. Hey, man, thanks for that.